All right, can everybody see my screen okay?
I'm good.
Okay. We should probably get started. So Jody, do you want to?
Oh yeah, I'm the first one. Hi, I'm Jody. I past president of NATS. I am also the NSTA district director for Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. I teach in a small rural school in Harvard, Nebraska, and I teach 6th grade and then 9 through 12.
I'm Anya Covarrubias. I'm from Grand Island, Nebraska, and I am the STEM academic coach here and the current president for NATS.
I am Scott King. I teach in North Platte, Nebraska, kind of center of the part of the state, and I am the president-elect of NATS.
Hello, everybody. I'm Betsy Berendt. I am the past president of NATS, and I am the digital learning coordinator and science learning coordinator for Lincoln Public Schools.
Some norms that we have for you guys as we get going through today. First of all, engage in open and collaborative dialogue, and remember to mute and unmute yourself as you guys choose to speak. All ideas are valid. We're going to honor diversity of ideas and practices. Share information and knowledge and expertise in the chat with our notes or with your voice. We're going to be using Pear Deck a lot today, so you guys can definitely share through that. Exhibit professional behavior as we go forward, and then be like a proton and think positive.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And just like we like to do with our kids in our classroom, we are going to be talking about system of assessments today, and we're just going to start with a notice and wonder activity. And so as I share my screen, I'll be able to see your responses here, almost like a chat. And we just want you to take a minute here and just look at that system that is from Michigan of their assessments, and just write down a couple of things that you notice. And we'll put you on the timer for 1 minute. All right, about 10 more seconds here. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of great things that we pulled out here. Classroom's big, state is small, scale, talking about key inputs, supporting both teaching and learning, and there is a gap. Great. All right, now we're just going to do what maybe are some things that you wonder about this graphic that is our example for system of assessments. So I'll give you another minute just to write down some of our wonderings. Well, great question about the states having the same system. question about the interim benchmark assessments. The cost of each assessment, correlating with the grain size of the assessment. That's a great question. How do the different districts assess? Great. How do the assessments support student learning? We still have a full minute, so really dig in there. We just got a PD last week that says never cut this time short. So I love that we're talking about the gap and what that means. And how do we pull all that together? Great question. How are teachers learning through assessment? All right, about 10 more seconds if you want to add any last comments. So this picture might be brand new for some people. It might be something that some of you are familiar with, but we're going to take you through another activity to really help you understand what this system of assessments means, and we'll dig a little deeper. Thanks for all of those responses.
All right, Betsy Barrett here. We want you to take a minute to think about, what you noticed about that Michigan system of assessment, and really try to summarize what your thinking is around that system. A few things you can think about as you're summarizing are: what are the components? What patterns did you see? Who is being supported in that system of assessment? And what scales of evidence will be collected? So I'm going to give you just a minute or less here to get some ideas down, and then we'll talk.
And if you need to pull up two screens, feel free to kind of side by side it. We really want to capture the responses that we're getting here as well.
Katie's asking if we could put the graphic back up. Is there any way to do that?
Sure.
I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to finish.
Well, I'm not sure, actually. If I go back, I'm not sure.
Our first attempt at using Pear Deck here. So All right, so I'm curious to hear how you guys are thinking about this Michigan system of assessment. Scott, what did you notice in that system of assessment?
Well, when I looked at it, I saw all the different levels of assessments. It wasn't just the classroom or the state. There was all these other steps in between that sometimes people don't think about.
Jody, what did you notice?
Stole my thunder.
Sorry.
Okay, no, I just said that even on I said I found it interesting that the state assessment was such a small piece of it, but yet I feel like teachers spend a lot of time focused specifically on that state assessment, but yet it's such a small piece.
Gotcha. Anya, how about you?
Well, I think that it definitely supports teacher teaching and learning. I think there's this opportunity for learning to take place and obviously teaching. And really it looks like I have a whole bunch of opportunities to collect information about my students, gather evidence about my students.
Okay. That sounds really similar to what Jody was saying, just about in a different way, just that how we do have a tendency to put a lot of emphasis on that state assessment, but with these systems of assessment, we've got lots of opportunities at different scales, at different levels, and different ways of assessing kids. Does anybody else want to share what they were thinking? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in.
Well, we can read out a couple of their responses.
Yeah, go for it.
Just many levels of assessment, not just state or classroom. Found it interesting that the state assessment was very small. I think that was maybe Jody. Input, teacher learning and student learning, various assessments. Valuing the data from the classroom level just as much or more than the value at the state summative assessment. Components, test, quizzes, project, formative assessments, and summative. Pattern is wide to narrow for data.
Good, good. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and take a look at what the experts say a coherent system of assessment is. And this comes from Achieve, and their basic definition to assess NGSS is you have to develop a coherent system of assessments that includes multiple varied assessment opportunities, and the pieces of that include supporting teaching and learning in the classroom, as well as supporting pragmatic and policy decisions. So what we would like you to do here is think about how you summarized what you were seeing in that Michigan assessment, system of assessment, and you're going to drag and drop thumbs up if you're seeing similar qualities in that system or how you summarize that system. So you can just drag that thumbs up and drop it where you see a similarity. And then if you see something different or maybe something that you disagree with, you can drag and drop that thumbs down. So we'll give you just a 30 to 45 seconds to do that.
And we put that little link in there below. That link is where we talk to the expert, which is kind of what we base this off of, which is the TAPS project, the task annotation. Oh, there we go.
And that link's in the chat.
Great. We got some thumbs up and some thumbs down, looks like.
Okay, so it looks like we see definitely some similarities but a few maybe differences there based on what we were able to summarize and think about from that Michigan model of assessment. So with that, I'm gonna turn things over to Scott, and he's gonna kind of help us zoom in to that district level of assessment. Go ahead, Scott.
Actually, it's me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's all
Jody.
good. Hey guys, all right, so what we've done is we asked each state to provide us kind of with their model or the way they think their assessment system is going to look, or their ideal situation. So there's a bit.ly, and we'd love for you guys to go there and find your state's model, and compare your state's model with Michigan's, and look for like what's similar, what's different, what patterns do you see, are all the scales represented, and did you notice any interesting perspective? We're not necessarily like trying to compare each other's to, but what we're trying to do is just look for ours against Michigan. So if you guys will go there and find your state, I'll put some of those questions back in the chat so that
I can flip back to it too. These are arranged by MINK, so Missouri's first, then Iowa. So here's our questions.
we'll give you guys a couple minutes to kind of look at that and compare.
And Jody, we have a question in the chat, which is, where do you want people to answer these questions?
I believe we were just gonna go to just go ahead and throw some stuff into the chat. It was too difficult for us to do the pair deck with this one.
And once everybody's done, we are gonna, collect some data from you guys. So, but yeah, go ahead and throw answers in the chat.
Looks like we've got a couple responses. Charlotte, I thought that was interesting too, to see the different perspectives, but it looks like most states all agree that there's a need for formative, interim, and summative all play roles in the system.
All right, Anya, if you want to go ahead and take us to our next slide here.
Okay.
What we would like to have you guys do.
Just looking through those there. There we go.
Okay, so what we would like you guys to do is go ahead in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, you'll see your code for your state. And if you can just drag and drop what you found that was similar between your state and Michigan's state assessment model. So go ahead, yeah, and just drag and drop what you see is similar.
Will it only let you drag one time, or is there a way to get the symbol again?
No, just once,
It's just one.
unfortunately.
Yeah, just try to get something that somebody else hasn't already
Good question, Katie.
worked.
That's me, the questioner.
All right, so we're seeing some definite similarities between our state models and Michigan's model. Does anybody have something that was different that they found between their state model and Michigan's model?
Eric had put something in the chat earlier and it looked like, it seemed really interesting to me. He says, Iowa's state assessment team is working to look more closely at the relationships that exist between the pieces and decide what questions can be answered by the various assessments and what questions cannot be answered, then work to answer those questions. But I'd love to know how that's coming along at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. By the way, as long as I have the microphone here, thank you to all of the Nebraska folks for putting this together today. This is exciting. So a round of applause for them. Yeah, I mean, that's really the work that our state assessment team is doing, and it consists of not just folks from the DE, but also district level assessment people and classroom teachers and what have you. So we have lots of different perspectives there. And I think, yeah, I think right now we're trying to help people to answer that question of what kinds of assessments can answer certain questions and what can't they answer. And if you're trying to answer a certain question about your district or your classroom or your school, what kind of assessment is most appropriate and what kind of data is most appropriate versus something that's maybe not as appropriate. So that's kind of the lens that we're using in our work. And like I said, we've done a pretty good job of establishing the pieces, and now we're just trying to work on the relationship part.
That's really, really interesting, especially when you think about this like a model, right? We've got to know the parts, but we also have to know how they're related to each other to really grasp what's going on for our kiddos. Thanks for sharing that, Eric.
Yeah, and then once you start to look at the relationships and figure out what they are, then you know where your leverage points are in that system. And that's really kind of the way we're attacking it.
Awesome. Did anybody notice any differences in scale between their state model and the Michigan model? Like, did you have more levels or more different levels than the Michigan model, or maybe you had fewer levels, or you went to a different scale, either wider or more specific? All right, one last question I'm going to throw out to you. What patterns do you see across all of the states? Anybody have some thoughts on that?
I'll speak up. So I think for the most part, everyone agrees in each state that the assessment system starts with formative assessment and ends with summative. But we just may have different stops along the way. And maybe our stops are in different orders. But one question when wondering, I guess I have when I'm looking at other states is looking at Nebraska. I see a difference between what we do in Missouri and then what we're looking at with Nebraska. And it brings about a question for when you guys say monitoring assessments, are those monitoring assessments at the state level, at the district level? It looks like they are around the grade levels that you give the summative assessment. Can someone say more about that?
I can, unless one of you guys want to.
That's okay. I was just going to say, Katie, can you jump in on this one? But I'm happy to help too. But no, you go ahead, Katie.
I'm going to say what I think I took from the meetings when we developed this model, but I want you guys to push back on this if I'm not communicating it correctly. I think that the dream is that eventually there will be some sort of this bank of these monitoring assessments at the other grade levels. We chose as a state that in 8th grade and 5th grade, our assessments will be grade level standard as far as the DCI goes. And we talked about that being, oh my gosh, so that's a lot of pressure for 5th grade and 8th grade. And of course, our 11th grade summative is ACT. So the discussion was that, well, eventually it would be great to have these state level monitoring assessments that would be given at these other grade levels. And then the dream would be that this data would carry over and somehow become a part of that final picture at 5th grade and 8th grade. Now, the rest of you chime in if I did not communicate.
I think that's spot on. The only thing I would add is I think perhaps a part of that will be map testing, which might be a part of that monitoring piece. But of course, with where we're at right now in the world and this pandemic, a lot of that is on hold in terms of of those decisions and maybe what that monitoring piece will be. I think eventually that's the vision, but let me qualify that with saying I very well could be wrong.
That's a question that I also have too, is what are we doing, like, at least for the state of Nebraska, because we were supposed to roll out our state assessment this year as a pilot, and now we're not going to have that pilot. So it'll be interesting. I'd like to know what the plan is for next year. Like, are we going to then get to pilot again next year and then wait another year before we really have actual numbers to look at? But
Great question, Jody. I don't have an answer.
I know they're working on that. It might look something like this pilot. The assessment of the assessment might come earlier, and then, but yet still have data. I mean, I know that they're working on it. It's just up in the air.
There any other states that kind of know where you're at with that? Anybody have some info to share?
I mean, I think what I can say is that I think that's a question at a national level. I mean, it's, you know, what are we doing to produce those kinds of assessments, those interim assessments, and how, you know, where are they available, who's producing them? And I know that we've had conversations among state supervisors along those lines, and there's some work being done, you know, but is it, you know, is it something that's being done state by state or on a national level? In Iowa, we've got some work that's happening with a group out of Stanford around the SCALE project, and we're doing some professional development starting next fall around helping teachers to develop some of those kinds of transfer tasks, and then they'll be made a part of a library that's accessible to everyone. So from what I've heard, it's sort of happening on a state by state level, but then there are national conversations happening as well. And it kind of depends too, you know, if you're using a certain provider for, you know, your assessments, they might have something available too, but yeah, it's definitely a conversation.
Any other states want to weigh in here? Okay, so now I'm going to turn things over to Scott, right?
Right.
So yeah, we've been looking at the state level, and Scott's going to zoom in for us. Here you go, Scott.
So we all know that, of course, we have these state tests that every state has. And of course, in Nebraska, at the 11th grade level, we even use the ACT as our state test. But we're going to take a smaller step back, a smaller scale, and we're going to look kind of what's going on at the district level. What is your district doing to actually report evidence of learning from your students? And so Anya has a little quiz for you, I guess, or little multiple choice options for you. We know that you'll have multiples of those. And go ahead, Anya. You may have map testing or common assessments in your PLC. So for me, I actually have both of those. You only get to choose one though. So choose one that you know you have. If you want to choose other, just go ahead and put that in the chat, and you guys can share the multiple things you do, or you can share a unique thing that happens in your state or in your district that might be different from other people. And like I said here, I actually have both of them, map testing and common assessments, in my current district. My previous district, I was the only science teacher, so we didn't worry about common assessments, and I get that may be different for each person. Looks as though those are kind of the two most common answers there. Map testing, I don't remember what the actual name of it is, but it's a progress-based test. You give it often in the fall and in the spring. And you can show growth for students. Yeah, measure of academic progress. There you go. Thank you, Betsy. It's in the chat, by the way. But you can see growth over the course of a year, and you can also see that summer slide coming back the next year. All right, I think that's kind of be where we're at. The thing about this is, no matter what we do, we know that our state assessments are not perfect. They can't do everything. And so we have this Swiss cheese, and if you've ever heard the Swiss cheese analogy, it's used a lot of times when trying to figure out how something catastrophic happened. Like, where did all the little pieces fail that allowed something bad to occur? And so the first piece of cheese would be your first frontline thing, so maybe your state testing. And we know it has a lot of holes. Then we have our next slice of cheese, which might be our district-wide assessments, you know, the MAP testing or the common summatives or whatever. And again, they're not perfect. And when those two slices line up, we wind up with a hole through them. And where that hole is, that's the people that we're not reaching. And that's where the failures occur, because we're not measuring that level of knowledge. One of the things about every single level of testing that occurs, whether it be in your classroom all the way up to the state, is you have to realize trade-offs are being made all the time. And, you know, so at the state level, maybe we aren't necessarily dealing with equity at the same way. Maybe at the state level, we're not dealing with a phenomenon and understanding how students think through a phenomenon and that sense-making piece that we have. So we have this lack of evidence. Anya is going to take us to the next slide. And so what we want to know is while we know that the state level and the district level do have holes, we want to know what's happening in your classroom. So what evidence of student learning do you collect in your own classrooms? And what we want you guys to do is type up different type of assessments that you use every day in your room to collect evidence of learning for your students in your room. You can look at all of these different parts of the equity, the scenarios, SCPs, DCIs, CCC, sense making, and assessment purpose as you think about what kind of assessments you use. Anya? So some of you guys are using at least 2 of the dimensions when you guys do assessments. You have some observations, quizzes, scenarios. I see discussions in there. Ability to sense make. You're trying to get that from your students. See some writing, unit assessments and labs. Instructionally embedded tasks. Observational assessments, making multimodal responses. That's a big one for equity. You know, overall, when I look at these responses that you guys gave us, they fit a lot of what we're trying to bring out today, is that sometimes the best way to get to know what a student is thinking is to actually talk to that student. And you can't do that on a statewide, you know, summative assessment. You can't do that on a standardized test. But when you talk to these kids, you know, these observations, or, you know, you walk around with your little clipboard and make those observations, you can cover up some of those gaps in that Swiss cheese. And you learn a lot more about your students. And are you now reporting those on in some way going forward?
All right.
Anya, I think it's yours.
Yeah, so this little graphic that we pulled off here is we got this out of the TAPS that we're going to be looking at in just a minute. But what we really want to talk about quick is, and kind of collect some data about, is this idea, and it looks like from those responses, so many of you are collecting all these different kinds of data, and not just on the DCI, right? And really given us an opportunity to see the sense making and making that thinking visible from students. And so this idea of collecting a body of evidence to assess the standard, instead of maybe just that summative test or that formative test that we really have an opportunity to do in the classroom, that really large part of that system is that classroom body of evidence. And so here we have this little drag and drop little dots again for you to mark. But so when we're thinking about evidence of student learning, we found a graphic that we liked and we remade it with some adjustments. But the idea of the summative assessment really is gathering evidence to clarify the proficiency more at the end. And these formative assessments really can be a couple of different things to assess the learning. It can be that conversational evidence, the written evidence, or the observational evidence, and really collecting multiple artifacts instead of just relying on that one quiz or that one exit ticket or that one test at the very end. And I know that when I was in the classroom, before I was collecting a body of evidence, I would typically say, you know, oh, he got a D on the test, but I saw him do that lab and I was hearing him explain that to another student. So I think he's better than a D. I'll bump that up to a C, you know, or, you know, we make those kind of decisions all the time. But this really, if we're collecting a body of evidence, we can use that little conversation or how they were, that thinking was being made visible during that lab, and use that actually as evidence to assign that grade. So if you would, we're just going to have you show some responses here. Green is what you do most of the time, and red would be one that you would like to try to dive into a little bit more. So green, what you usually do, and red, one that you would like to dive into a little more. We have some homework that we're going to introduce later for some of this observational and conversational evidence. So make sure everyone does their homework. All right, about 10 more seconds here, and we will move on to our next slide. So we want to actually take you to where we got the information from today. And we really want to think about a couple of questions. When we're thinking about those tasks that we do develop for our classroom, whether it be a written response, observational, or something that's a conversation that we can collect evidence from, what do those tasks look like? And what all of the pieces should we be thinking about? We, you know, earlier mentioned that it shouldn't be just DCI. So what are some example tasks that we can look at? And TAPS provides some great examples for us. So this is the task annotation project. And Scott's gonna put these links in the chat. He might already be doing so. But we're gonna do this first one together, this heated cup of water. And this is a really popular one. I know Jody said that she's done this one a couple of times. But we just wanna look through this. So the first link is going to be your example task. And then there's actually going to be a task analysis done that really shows us how they felt they did and where they were lacking some evidence in their task, and where they could maybe improve with the task. So if we go to this heated cup, so you can see we have our annotation key at the top that we've been having on our slides. And so you can see the task is over here. And it gives us the areas that the students they're really kind of focusing on in this task. And so we're really looking at scenarios here. Second part. And it really pulls out where the DCI is. The SEP, we can see that there's some sense making here because we're constructing a model, really making that thinking visible. And so after you get done looking at your task, we're going to have you click on your grade level task analysis. And this document is actually going to show you the strengths and your opportunities for improvement. So you can kind of go through those and look how it supported all students, some summary points, and how this task should be used. And so there's lots of examples on this website. And so we just want to give you a few minutes to dive into one that is for the grade level that you are involved with. So we'll go back over here. Scott, do you have those links in the chat? So we have an elementary task for oil spills, a middle school task for natural hazards, and a high school task for 2 species or 1.
Those are all in the chat box. And Anya, we're only going to give about 3 minutes here because we got to move on.
Perfect. So just the 3 minutes, just kind of a quick little overview. What I did, we're really going to be using these in our next session and discussing some examples. And so we just kind of want you to become familiar with it today and see how TAPS is analyzing these tasks and what they're doing well and where they have room to improve.
Can I ask a quick clarification question, Anya? And Katie, you might be able to answer this too, because we were both in on this. But as teachers are looking at this, or as everybody who's here is looking at this, are they looking for what evidence was found in those tasks, in those assessments? Is that what they're kind of looking for, is what evidence of student learning could be found in those assessments?
Right. Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, and then we're going to have you collect some data. So the star is going to be what evidence that you see that that they're doing well, and the thumbs down would be where they have to improve. And you can just go ahead and put it down here on this graphic that we have. Thanks for that clarification, Betsy. So Star, where do you think your task does a good job? Okay, about 30 more seconds here. So kind of just scroll through yours. Where did they have some room for improvement? Just pick one. And what did they do well? Gives us a real nice graphic, Betsy, for our next slide here. Okay, about 10 seconds. All right, Betsy, do you want to help us analyze what we're doing at the classroom level with our tasks?
Got to unmute my microphone, sorry.
Yeah.
So what I really want you to think about is, can one task do it all? And this, I mean, this kind of goes back to one thing Scott was talking about is, you know, can one assessment do it all? So stop and just think about that for a second based on the tasks and the analysis that you looked at from the task annotation project. And just in your head, think, can one task do everything that we're expecting from three-dimensional teaching and learning? So Anya, I'm going to throw this question at you. Will one assessment allow you to collect that complete body of evidence?
Well, I think obviously in our assessment system, you know, we can see those different levels. But as a classroom teacher, I try to think of it almost like a scientist. Like, all of us are, you know, scientists at heart, and we know that when we're doing an experiment or if we were in the field, we wouldn't rely on just one thing to assess. You know, we wouldn't trust just one piece of data. And so I think this makes really great sense, collecting that body of assessment, multiple tasks, and just, you know, looking at that last graphic down at the bottom, there was all sorts of places where the task did well and then not as well. And so it makes sense to really use all the different types of assessment or tasks that you could in a classroom to collect all the evidence that you would need, in my opinion.
Thanks for sharing. So another thing that I was kind of thinking about is, and this actually came out in our conversation, is how did these tasks look different from traditional assessment? Jody, can you weigh in there?
Yeah, this was the part, like the aha part of the conversation, because there's multiple, like, not issues, but teachers struggling to adjust to this. And one of them is like, I have, like, for my school district, I have to put 2 grades in a week. How do I do that? Well, by using different, like, exit tickets and such to that, like, there's my grade, but there's also how I'm assessing students' progress. It's a different way of thinking. We're not, it used to be the traditional assessment was done at the end of the unit, and if a student passed that test, he or she was proficient. Now it's not based off of one test, but rather us collecting evidence to support that yes, this student is learning these concepts and these ideas.
Thanks, Jody. And maybe the question that I always wondered about the most is, what does this look like in the classroom? Scott, do you have some ideas for us?
Well, I mean, you guys all hit on this very well. Of those observations, those conversations that you have with students are huge when it comes to assessing what a student knows. Of course, a big part of that then is recording that information. So maybe you walk around with a clipboard and, you know, record that you had a conversation, because you have to somehow report this back to the district that the student actually knew this material and not just, well, yeah, I kind of think he knew it.
All right. Thank you so much for weighing in there, guys. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Jody.
Yeah, we have a couple of things that we would love for you guys to do in preparation for our next session. It's here's one, the STEM teaching tools. Oh, what? Oh, okay. Nice. Honestly and truthfully, this whole entire process, I had been very confused about assessment systems, and through this process, I've learned a ton. And one of the tools was using the STEM teaching tools, and the other one is to choose your own adventure. There's practice briefs on assessments. We just want you to take one and read about it and come back with that information, because that's what we'll utilize that at our next session. Finally, here's just some of the resources that we've used. They were super helpful for me because, like I said, 2-3 weeks ago when we started really diving deep into this, it was Anya was talking so far over my head, I had no idea what she was talking about. So these resources are super helpful. So I think, other than that, I think we are done. We want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to start looking at this stuff. I know everybody's kind of sick of Zoom, so hopefully we see you guys at our next session, and stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
And there is a link that I just shared in the chat. It's just a form that we would like you to fill out. And thank you for attending our MINK session on assessment. Hopefully we see you on the 26th.